idea that you can't step outside of it.
Okay. And this question is, you told us that God is all there is, or is all that is, and that it is existence itself. Could
Yes.
you explain how evil and darkness fit into this? Now, maybe you already
In a
answered
sense, yes,
earlier.
we have already addressed this, and we wouldn't again use the concept or the label you're calling evil. We focus on the idea that there is positive and negative energy, positive being integrative and expansive and connective, and going more in the alignment of flow with existence, because it is slightly more in the positive direction than negative, because there's always a balance point in the center that gives you the freedom to choose. And the freedom to choose is a positive thing. So in a sense, existence is bent slightly in the positive direction. The idea of evil may simply be an insistence on continuing to express and choose and act out of the idea of misalignment, of negative energy, which is segregative, disconnective, inexperience, and diminishing. So the idea is that a continued persistence or insistence on the idea of continuing to go out of alignment and take actions that are also designed to promote the idea of misalignment in that way. If you want to say that that's evil, well, all right, but that's really just a value judgment. Remember that the idea of evil is just live backwards or live backwards. So the idea, if you want to play a game with words, is to recognize that evil is simply not really living to your true potential. So the idea of negative and positive energy, in a mechanical sense, is a little bit more discerning about what it is a person is doing instead of just falling under the label of evil. Because it's really that everyone is made of existence. Everyone is, in a sense, supported unconditionally with love. So the idea is that everyone is attempting to align with that love, but many people may not understand how to do so because they've never been taught how to do so. So even though they may be acting negatively, the basic intention of the soul is to align with all that is. They just may not be very good at it.
Right, because the question completed with, is evil part of God?
Everything is part of God. There's no such thing as anything that's not. But that's why we're saying it's not really about labeling it as evil, but understanding that within existence there is always positive and negative.
And so according to science, some people are born without empathy, so-called psychopaths.
Yes.
Others inflict pain because they've been traumatized themselves.
Yes.
How is this possible? How is this possible if we're all made out of love?
Well, again, you have the freedom to choose. If you weren't unconditionally loved, you wouldn't have the freedom to choose. So the idea is that choices are made either from the spirit level for certain thematic explorations or from within the experiences of physical reality that determine what kind of choices you will make. So remember, when you say you're all made out of love, well, yes, in a sense that's true, but being made out of love gives you the freedom to choose how you want to express that, either positively or negatively, because it can be done either way. That's what unconditional love means. It's unconditional.
And so when we're out of balance in some way, for example, feeling extreme physical pain or living in poverty or experiencing loss or devastation or total emptiness, it's almost impossible to find anything to be excited about in order to follow the formula when you're in that state. At those times, we keep matching the frequency we don't want, and what we don't want is what we keep getting back. How can we shift our frequency at those moments of total despair?
First and foremost, by understanding that it can be looked at as being there as a lesson that can allow you to experience something other than that. If you don't have the capacity or the learning or the teaching or the wherewithal to discover within yourself that everything that happens can be used to learn a lesson in a positive way, then yes, you may have created a reality where you don't even necessarily have the awareness that it can be used that way, and you can feel trapped. But nevertheless, the idea of even saying that it is simply too difficult to find your way out of it is what reinforces the difficulty in finding your way out of it. So first and foremost, no matter what your state of being, no matter how negative or hopeless it may seem, to understand that it is only the product of what you believe to be true, and to not heap upon yourself more difficulty by assuming that it is more difficult than it needs to be, by understanding that it is only the product of a belief, by understanding that anything can be used as a lesson in a positive way to allow you to experience something else, by being honest within yourself, by looking around the world and seeing examples of others who are doing things that you would also prefer to do, and knowing that you wouldn't be capable of seeing them at all if you weren't capable of it as well. Looking at those things that are positive and knowing that's part of your reality too, and not just being mired down in the idea of what you're experiencing immediately and only within a very narrow set of parameters. If you're willing at all to expand your vision to see that you can be aware of other things other than what you're experiencing, then that should be your first clue that you can divest yourself of the experience that you're having if you understand the reason why you may have co-created it to begin with.
And then when one is in a time of being emotionally devastated, and since there is no such thing as time,
there is the experience of time, even though time itself is a creation and a side effect.
I think the concern was, if time's not real and you're in a state of devastation, does that mean that you'll be in that state of devastation forever? Because right.
You won't experience it that way. There will always be some version of reality that experiences devastation. But remember, when you say forever, that's a temporal label. And in a sense, there is only here and now. So in a very real way, even though things exist and can't not exist, saying things last forever is an illusion. Because forever is an illusion. Because there is only here and now. So we understand that this can seem extremely paradoxical to beings that are focused in a space-time reality. But nevertheless, in a sense you could say, things always are, but nothing lasts forever. And we apologize if this seems confusing, but that's the way it is.
Well, when you talked about the film strip analogy and the idea that each frame is there, but it's frozen and it's activated by consciousness, right?
In a sense, yes, and therefore you get to choose the frames by choosing what you believe to be true. So while the frames are, in a sense, there forever, the frame you're experiencing isn't. It changes billions of times per second. Otherwise, you wouldn't be experiencing the idea of time. So in a sense, the experience of time is your first clue that you don't have to experience things forever, because by the fact that you're experiencing time at all means you're shifting billions of times a second, and you're never in the same state. You're never in the same reality, even though you may experience it that way by creating the illusion of continuity.
And in the structure of existence, change is the only constant, right?
Your relationship to the structure is what always changes. And in that sense, yes. Although obviously the structure is constant in its own way, that's not what determines your experience of it. Your perspective of it, your relationship to it, your belief about it is what changes your experience of the structure that never changes.
And when you say, are there some parts of our reality that cannot be changed by the individual because they're created by the collective and can't be overridden?
Yes, because you've agreed to play by certain rules. There may be a lot of leeway, a lot more leeway than many of you have been taught to believe is possible. And so you can certainly explore what is relevant for you to experience that might make it very different than the general consensus reality. But there's a lot of flexibility in the consensus, especially in this day and age of transformation. But there are certain things that you don't need to have changed, that aren't relevant for you to change, because if you change them, then you wouldn't be, in a sense, playing the same game at all. So while you have made the choice to play a certain game, or as we often say, walk down a certain hallway, and that hallway will remain because you are that hallway. This personality is that theme, is that destiny, because it's unique. There are many things you can do within that hallway. Walk, run, crawl, fly, happy, sad, look at all the doors, ignore them all. You have the freedom to explore the hallway with a lot of leeway, but you will explore the hallway because that's what you agreed to do as this personality experience. You are the hallway. And therefore, even though you change the expression of the personality, the unique perspective you are as an identity, as a reflection of all that is, that doesn't change. So when you say, this is how I'm going to experience my true identity with this personality structure to explore this theme in this game of Earth, in physical reality, that's what you're going to experience. But like the game of chess, even though you've agreed to play by the rules of chess so that you know you're playing chess and not checkers, or some other game with a different set of rules, there are still a lot of things you can do differently within playing the game of chess in terms of the kind of pieces you use, what they're made of, what your strategy is, so on and so forth. So a lot of flexibility, but you're going to play the game of chess because that's what you agreed to play.
And one of the key things when you're dealing with your theme is whether or not something's relevant, as you mentioned. So you can always fall back on, if something isn't manifesting, it may not be relevant.
At least not at that moment.
Right.
Because again, remember, there are two types of synchronicity. There's the synchronicity that brings you opportunities to act on that become obvious as part of your path. And there's the synchronicity that says, no, this is not part of your path, at least right now, and therefore that synchronicity actually prevents you from being able to move forward in a certain direction that isn't you. So the idea, that's why we always say, is make sure you're clear within yourself that you're not the one blocking yourself from going down a certain path. But if you're clear that you're not really doing anything or have a belief that you're holding on to that's stopping you, then you have to know that synchronicity itself is telling you this isn't your path right now. Go in another direction you're capable of acting on that represents your passion. And maybe you'll come back to this, but right now, synchronicity is guiding you flawlessly by both giving you an opportunity to act on something and also preventing you from acting on things that simply aren't you right now.